Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast, the podcast all about the delicate balance between people and business, and quite literally reconnecting the two. My name is Tracy Rubin, and I've spent nearly my entire professional career in HR. Join me as I share stories, opinions, and words of advice with you each week. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for being here. You know the drill. At the end of this episode, don't forget to pull your phone back out, or if you're on the computer, bring that screen back up and subscribe to this podcast. You don't have to do it now. I get it. You probably just put your phone away. That's okay. I'm just letting you know when this episode is over, when you're done listening, go and subscribe, rate, review, leave a comment, leave a review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. Actually, now on Spotify, you can give this episode 5 stars, and this podcast, I should say 5 stars. If you're listening on YouTube, or I should say watching on YouTube, even though this is podcast only, I'm not doing video right now, you could totally leave a comment, give it a like, whatever you want to do. There are so many ways to interact with me and get connected. So be sure to click the link when you do bring your phone back out or raise that computer screen to, click the link tree and get connected with me. So first and foremost, I just want to recap last week's episode where we talked with Erin Deal about laughter and levity and improv. And I just hope that you loved the episode as much as I did recording it. Erin is so funny. I mean, her Instagram lifts my spirits every day. And I just think that she's really doing something very creative and very interesting in a space that can be very monotonous. I mean, even sometimes I get onto my mic or I get ready to record and I'm like, how am I going to give the listeners something fresh? Like, they're hearing about this at work. They're talking about these things with their coworkers and their employees. And the question is really whether or not this can be an exciting topic. And this is destigmatizing HR, right? We always talk about this. Let's destigmatize it. And that is what Erin does. And so I hope that when you listen to that episode, you really took that away. And actually, while we're recapping some episodes, I hope that you also listen to the last few. Before Erin, there was an episode on how our jobs in HR have changed and if we've become the school nurse in some ways. And it seems like a lot of you really love that episode, but I really would love, if you haven't listened to that yet, put that on your roster of things to go back to, because I would love your thoughts, but also I think it's helpful to know and hear some solutions or ideas for some solutions, especially to something that can be a point of frustration. And then the final recap, the last 3, maybe this is like a flash of like every episode, like the last 3 or the episodes you should go back to check on. Anyway, the third last episode was really about manifesting destiny. And it was the first episode after 2021. So first episode of 2022. And I have to tell you, I'm doing absolutely nothing that I said I would do. I am not actually, let me take that back. Let's rewind. I need to add a rewind sound. Note to self, if I ever get a producer for this show, we've got to add some sound effects. I am not waking up, getting ready, getting my day started. I'm doing that certain days, but I'm not setting the intention the way that I normally would at the beginning of the year. Like, I definitely felt like this year came to a head so fast, and I didn't have a second to even think about, okay, what are my goals? Other than, of course, the goals that I shared, and I still want to hit all of those goals, such as doubling the audience of the podcast that I technically am working at every week, because I am trying to be more active on social, and I'm obviously recording an episode every week. So let's say we're doing that. But some of the things that I thought about as far as like getting myself 100% centered for this year, don't know that I'm doing that. So I'm sure I'm not the only one that said, I'm going to start all of my routines again. And like already 3 weeks in, it's like, did I even start? Let alone, am I not finishing? So I think in February, I'm going to restart, or like next week, I'm going to restart and just kind of get back to that feeling of being inspired to do something new or continue something that I'm doing, and just be my #be my best self every single day. And it's really hard, especially when you have a lot going on, And don't want to blame things on COVID or workloads or anything like that, but for sure, having a crazy workload because of uncontrollable things like COVID make it definitely fairly difficult to put those routines in place because so much of the day-to-day feels a little bit like up in the air. So that's my excuse for the day. Next week, I definitely hope to come back to you and let you know that I've, re-inspired myself or centered or whatever we want to say. Anyway, so those are the 3 episodes that you need to go back, catch up on, whether it's after this episode or otherwise. I wanted to spend the rest of the time talking today about 2 things. And I'm thinking about trying something new like once a month where it's just a quick episode, whether it's on a Tuesday or a different day, a quick episode to talk about hot topics in HR for the week, because I want to maximize when our attention is on something, if something pops up in the news and it's happening, I want us to have attention on it, and be able to like think about it quickly and not have to sit down for a whole 30-minute episode, but really just kind of hear it out. So the first thing is that I read an article that was in one of the Human Times newsletter send outs. And you guys know, if you've listened to the podcast, I always use Human Times for my HR information, and I get the newsletter every single day, and the link is actually in my link tree if you want to subscribe to it as well. But one of the articles was that bosses now are more likely to rationalize unethical behavior, and that stopped me in my tracks. And I wanted to talk about this as a quick FYI, because I think that what this article talks about is actually totally realistic and understandable. One of the quotes in the article says, "The COVID-19 pandemic has had a serious impact on integrity standards for companies around the world. Hybrid working makes it difficult to undertake effective compliance monitoring, and fraud risk factors typically increase at a time of crisis." And I just have to say, the things that slide by in moments of crisis, it's true. I've seen it throughout my entire career. When there is a fire to put out, everything else falls by the wayside. But this fire has been burning for 2 years. So you can only imagine the lack of equity that is, being seen, I guess, in companies, or the lack of integrity, or the things that are losing their integrity. And so I think if you are an HR professional, this is your reminder to think about the basics of the role, right? Like think about compliance and how we are risk mitigators for our organizations. And I took this article as a message to myself also, like, oh, have I gone through my compliance checks? Have I done anything in my role that really establishes whether or not we have a compliance issue somewhere? And obviously it does take a lot of work, and you need the bandwidth and you need the time to go through this process. But I thought I would take this opportunity to talk through why compliance is so important, why we are the risk mitigators, and how that should be a signal to you all to step into tomorrow or today, depending on the time you're listening to this episode. Maybe you're listening fresh, start of the day, either at midnight or 8 a.m., right when this episode comes out. But, let this inspire you to kind of go back to those things that you did in 2019 that ensured risk mitigation. So first and foremost, we as HR leaders look at compliance as a part of our job description. And that is where we know HR sometimes is considered or, seen as synonymous with like the fun police or, the people that are quote unquote two-faced or whatever in the organization, because compliance and rules are part of what we do and follow up on. And that's fine and dandy, but really the meat and potatoes of compliance is that we have to make sure that we are making decisions using risk factors, understanding the risk factors, and with a risk assessment. And I've talked about this before on the podcast, that when you make a risk assessment, you have to really think about, okay, if I make this decision, what will the risk be? If I make that decision, what will the risk be for that decision? And so for us as HR professionals, if the majority of our workload has shifted into this like reactive needing to manage things because COVID and the great reshuffling, which I know now it's no longer the Great Resignation, it's now the great reshuffling. If that has taken up the majority of your time, then yes, you are going to probably have forgotten about that other part of your job, which is to mitigate risk and focus on compliance. So there are certain things that, depending on the role that you're in, there are requirements and things annually or quarterly that you're going to be checking up on anyway. But I do think for us, the compliance pieces that are, maybe a little bit harder to see and not necessarily built into a clear set of guidelines, which when I think of, for example, I think of meal breaks. Like, yes, it's in a handbook, right? And they're built into schedules, but are they? Like, are your leaders building them into schedules if you have a non-exempt employee? And how are you following up on them? So, I think about that. And I think for you, if you have a population that is impacted by laws or guidance that impacts them either at the local, state, or federal level, this is your sign to go back to that, have a meeting of the minds with your team, and think about how you are going to use this quarter, because we're in Q1, depending on the fiscal year, when your fiscal year starts. But if you're in Q1 like me, this is the time to get that done. The second thing, which is also an article that came through Human Times that made me think a little bit differently, is about unions. And I've talked about unions before when we found out that the one location in Buffalo was going union. And this article from the New York Times says that REI workers are seeking to form their first union ever. So REI is not a union environment. They don't have any union environments. And a store right here in Manhattan is looking to unionize. And the quote that I thought was the most interesting says that the campaign was partly a response to a tangible shift in the culture at work that doesn't seem to align with the values that brought most of us here. And I thought that was so compelling, because this could honestly be an episode on itself and on its own. And I probably should make note of that it should be, that people tend to gravitate toward the idea of unionizing when the culture or employee engagement is at an all-time low. And this is where leaders and HR professionals really have to take note that cultures and experiences and work environments can have more to cost an organization than just resignations. Like, if things get bad enough, people actually then decide, you know what, I'm not going to rely on my employer to do the right thing. I want representation. And now, yes, like, there are pros and cons to unions. If you go back to my episode on unions, you'll hear some of that. But when we think about most environments, unions can potentially carry more cons than pros, because it might feel like you have a little bit more freedom, but you might not. The key here is that, and what I'm really trying to get at, because I'm not talking about the pros and cons on this episode, I'm talking about specifically how unions typically come out of poor work environments or negative employee experience. And yes, you can have that in union environments for sure. But when someone is having a bad experience, or they feel like, maybe their concerns aren't being heard, there is a union representative who represents their interests. And so it is a little bit of a dynamic shift versus when you're in your own non-union environment and you're going to an HR partner, or you're managing things on your own or attempting to. So if you are an HR professional or a manager, think about, this is almost like a call to action episode, I feel like. Think about what the culture of your environment is today. Are your employees happy? Are the team members on other teams happy? Are the people in your network, excited to come to work? Are they inspired? Are they producing good work? Are they connected to the bigger picture? Or has the culture changed? Is employee engagement down? Are your surveys negative? Those things, there are so many reasons to address those issues and so many reasons to solve those problems, right? Not just resignations, not just productivity, not just employee engagement, but also the impact to the business in the long run. Cultures can break down a lot faster than they take to build up. Like, I think about a time when I worked in Target where I had to create a positive work environment in a store that I would call broken. so to speak. That was the term. It's like a broken culture, a broken store. And I think it took a year and a half to fix the culture in that store, but it took maybe 5 weeks to break, because all it takes is one negative Nancy, right? Or a bad egg, or someone who really doesn't have the best interest of the team to negate or, degrade that culture that takes so long to build. So for you as a leader, this is your call to action. Think about your culture, think about your work environment, and is it what you would consider an environment that people want to be in and that people want to come back to? And if the answer is yes, then congratulations, you should share your secrets with everyone so that everyone can have an amazing experience. And if the answer is no, that's okay. There are ways to improve the culture. I think that a big part of the culture, we know it takes everyone and everyone's buy-in to create and build a positive work environment and culture. But it only takes one person to tear it down. So if you have, if you're in a place where you have the buy-in from the people around you and everyone is committed to driving an amazing work environment, then the hardest part of your job is over. And now it's just a matter of actually putting those plans into place, putting actions behind your thoughts and ideas so that you can create what it is that you want to create and be around. The first is to go back to your compliance routines. Are you and your teams acting with integrity? Are you following, the minimum expectation for compliance? Do you have the plans in place that mitigate risk for you and your organization? There are so many things there, because compliance is not just mitigating risk, right? It's also ensuring that things are being completed at the times that they're supposed to be completed. Are people taking meals? Are they taking time for themselves? Do they have sick time? Things that are, employee facing and maybe more back of house. Like when I think about compliance, it's all encompassing. So don't stop your, review of compliance at just the back of house things, meaning, your handbook and the law and things like that. Think about compliance more broadly. Think about how it impacts employees and what compliance really means for them. Employees sometimes need the understanding of what compliance means and what risk mitigation means. So if you have a manager maybe who's having some challenges with their team, do they understand why they can't just terminate that person or a certain individual? And if they do they understand that there's actually a way to hopefully improve performance, for example? So even that is compliance. So when you respond to this call to action, really think beyond the four corners of the lines, drawn in the sand here, and go beyond what compliance might mean on the surface so that you can really ensure that you're kind of attacking all of those things. And I definitely can do a longer episode on this and break down some of the routines that I have too. So let me know if you want to hear more about that. The second call to action is to make sure that you're looking at your culture and employee engagement. Are people happy? Do you have a work environment that is encouraging, that people want to be in and around? And you are not the sole provider of a healthy and positive work environment, but you can definitely make an impact if it is not the environment that it should be. So I hope that these 2 points and calls to action inspire you for the week ahead. And again, we have some amazing episodes coming up. This one was a short one for you today, but you know what? I like to keep you on your toes. Sometimes I give you a 40-minute episode. Sometimes you get a 20-minute episode, and that's just the way we'll roll. That's okay. We do things differently over here. So again, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Don't forget to do exactly what we talked about in the beginning of this episode, which was to rate, review, subscribe, and don't forget to share with a friend, colleague, family member, etc. If you are, interested, make sure that you follow me on Instagram as well. Get connected and reach out if there's a specific topic that you want to hear. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you next week.